Hello, this is Ukrlife with Liudmyla Nemyria, and we continue our broadcasting from Kiev. And we are very happy that today with us is famous Austrian military analyst Tom Cooper. Tom, hello, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Very, very nice to be with you.
Thank you. Tom, many Ukrainians know that how constantly you analyze the situation on the Ukrainian battlefields. And I constantly read you, but unfortunately we haven't interviewed you for a long time. And that is why let me start from the very beginning. And I will start from your understanding of the Ukrainian offensive and general situation on the battlefields in 2023, because there was many expectation as well in Ukraine, as well on the West, from this offensive. And in the end, we understand that the situation is not so simple as many expected. And that is why, what is your understanding? What happened in 2023?
Well, there was obviously the impression, at least in Ukraine, that deliveries of a little bit. I say now a little bit. It is not just a little bit. It was something, but it was not far from enough, and it was obvious right from the start. A little bit of equipment, of heavy equipment of Western origin, Leopard tanks, Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, additional amounts of artillery ammunition, machine guns, night vision equipment, and so on, that this would be enough to run one big offensive, push down to Russian positions in southern Zaporozhye, reach at least, Tokmak, if not Melitopol, drive all the way to the sea, and thus isolate the Crimean Peninsula from Russia, so to say, to cut off this Russian bridgehead connecting Crimean with southwestern Russia via southern Ukraine. That was the expectation, and this expectation was simply too much, because right from the start it was obvious that the West is delivering much too little of heavy equipment, especially demining equipment, and that the mass of that new equipment was actually used to create new brigades instead of rebuild existing brigades, which would be my idea in this regards. When you have this mix of developments, I don't know, at least from my point of view, this was making me skeptical. It was making me, oh gosh, is this going to work or not going to work, at least in my case. And I've had several interviews with your colleagues from different other TV channels last year in March and in April and May, and I was trying to caution them and so on, but there was nothing else than arrogance. And I was just hoping that the ZSU, the Ukrainian armed forces, are not as arrogant in their approach. Sadly, as it turned out, there was lots of arrogance, there were lots of too high expectations, not only in Ukraine, in the West as well. The Russians have been left 1 year to prepare their defenses in southern Ukraine, southern Zaporozhye in particular, to develop this thick and deep minefield, some 10 to 15 kilometers deep and very dense. And Ukraine had hopelessly too little demining equipment to breach this minefield and get to the Russian positions on time. When I say on time, I mean quickly, which means in the first few hours of an advance. Capture the positions and then use this opportunity to push deeper behind Russian positions. What happened then was that the Russians were given enough time to bring in reinforcements, to move their reserves from deeper behind the front line, and to plug the gaps in their front lines. And this is what went on through June, through July, August, into September, until October. And then, of course, Ukraine was starting to run out of steam. Why? Because on one side, the West couldn't keep up the pace with supplying heavy equipment and artillery ammunition in particular, because what it has pledged to Ukraine was too little right from the start. You cannot run this kind of an offensive with 100 tanks and 300 infantry fighting vehicles. It's simply not enough. And even less so if you're getting just 50 to 60,000 shells a month, while you know that you would need at least 100,000 and ideally would get 300,000. And we still don't have a situation where Ukraine is getting so much ammunition. And finally, there was this development in the Middle East where Israel and Arabs started another war. And of course, Israel promptly attracted Western attention, most of it, and has meanwhile got something like 70,000 shells, which originally actually destined for Ukraine, went to Israel instead. So you have a situation where things were not working the way they were expected to work, or should have worked, or there were hopes for them to work. The original plan for attack failed almost right from the start, except in two minor areas. And therefore, after something like 1-2 weeks of fighting, the Ukrainian counteroffensive came to a halt, and then there were new attempts are relaunched only once it was obvious that Ukraine needs a different approach. And this was a very slow, grinding approach, clearing mines literally by hand to kilometers of Russian minefields. This was very time-consuming, also very costly in terms of human casualties for Ukraine. And as much as Russians have suffered terrible losses in their counterattacks and in their artillery, as much as their units in southern Zaporozhye nowadays are only a shadow of themselves, of what they used to be back in May, June last year, it was not enough. It was simply not enough, because the Russians continued pumping troops into their positions. And also their positions, which were recognized on satellite photographs, they were very obvious, but actually distracting away from the fact that the Russians have had lots of concealed underground positions. And this needs lots of mopping, so-called mopping, which means Ukraine had to send infantry into these positions and to clear them of Russian troops, meter by meter by meter by meter, and then by hundreds of meters and kilometers and so on. And so in some cases, you had situations where Ukrainians would clear up some sector of the front line, but then before they could move their troops via Russian minefields to their new positions, the Russians would already counterattack and force them back, force them to withdraw. In this regard, there were also units. I mean, there are such mistakes. I cannot understand how could this happen. For example, units were trained to assault a Russian position, but not how to hold it. Then other units were trained in always for one or the other kind of operation, but not for everything. So obviously there was a big haste, with just training more troops, form additional units, send them to the front line, let them launch an offensive. Then things failed. We have seen in what was that, July or August, when the 118th Brigade attacked into the Russian position, and then entirely unexpectedly ran into an unknown concealed position between Robotine and what was that, Verbove, yes. And an entire company of troops was shot to pieces or captured or whatever. I mean, it was really painful to watch this. So, I said, by October, this counteroffensive petered out. What was the worst in all of this situation? Additional months passed by. And through all of this time, the Russians have had the opportunity to train additional 20 to 25,000 troops a month. But they were losing perhaps 10,000, perhaps 15,000 troops a month, which means that they were still replacing their lost troops with more of freshly trained troops, or newly trained, whether mobics or reservists or whatever we want to call them. And this meant in long term, the Russians, as much as they were suffering heavier losses than the Ukrainians, the Russians were winning the battle of attrition. Why was this of importance? The entire Russian defense system in southern Ukraine, the entire front line is nowadays constructed so that to prevent such situations like in southeastern Kharkiv of September 2022, to prevent rapid Ukrainian penetration of Russian front line and advance into the Russian rear. So what they have nowadays is to have these chick minefields. Then behind them they have the first front line which is relatively lightly occupied by their troops, and then they have lots of reserves deeper in the rear. So even if Ukrainians cross the front line, cross the minefields, cross the front line, and advance into the Russian rear, they are only then going to meet major Russian formations. And then the problems are starting. We have seen this several times in June last year. Ukrainian units would cross the minefields, enter a village, enter another village, drive 5 or 10, even I think the deepest penetration was some 17 kilometers behind, south of the Russian minefield. And then they would run into an ambush and suffer heavy losses. People were captured. Russians were showing trophies around, and so on and so on. You know, this complex of issues and problems was what was working against Ukrainian counteroffensive. There was arrogance on one side, there was over-enthusiasm, lack of experience, lack of professionalism in between commander cadre, and you see this also in the organization of Ukrainian front lines and organization of the entire army. You have general staff at the top, you have local commands in the middle, then you have no divisions, you have lots of brigades and lots of battalions, but you don't have any kind of divisions in between. Why? Because there are not enough generals or experienced officers to command multiple brigades. So time and again you have one or another of Ukrainian colonels or lieutenant colonels in command of a brigade, and then they are assigned 1 battalion reinforcement, 2 battalions, 5 battalions, pieces, you know, from 5 to 10 or even 15 different units to hold a specific sector of front line. We have seen this in Bakhmut early last year, and things are not working. There is just a chaos and everybody is blaming each other, you know. Everybody knows better. When you talk with officers, everybody knows better. Nobody is making mistakes. You know, again, when you have this complex of factors influencing a battle, the outcome is pre-programmed and it couldn't work. There was always a hope, okay, they might eventually combine interrupting the flow of Russian supplies, you know, by cutting off the bridges on the Crimea or striking the ports where the supplies were arriving, Melitopol, Berdyansk, and so on. And in a crucial moment also, you know, in combination with an advance of troops on the front line and destruction of Russian reserves. But it was never enough to create this critical mass which would prompt the Russians to fall back, to start withdrawing out of control. And that was the problem. And this is what eventually didn't work. And so the offensive ended with, let's say, this way. The Russians have suffered much more losses than the Ukrainians. But the problem is that it was not enough for Ukrainians for Ukrainian offensive to succeed. And this can only be summarized with a failure. The offensive didn't end with liberation of Tokmak, not of Melitopol, not of Mariupol, or wherever ZSU wanted to reach. So this is a failure. I hope everybody involved, and there are enough survivors between officers, between troops, is going to learn their lesson from this, is going to become less arrogant and learn, you know, also that they do not know everything better than somebody else, to tame their enthusiasm and to approach their tasks with cooler heads, so to say. That is my hope as next. And then we might see if there is also, of course, enough heavy equipment delivered by the West and by Ukraine itself, then we might see some other kind of operations in the future with much better success.
Tom, I remember how in the end of the 2022, everybody say about the counteroffensive, Ukrainian counteroffensive, which will be possible on 2023. And, you know, it was high expectations and many, many other things. Today we have a little bit another strategy. Many Ukrainians, militaries and military experts, and there are many publications on the West that Ukraine needs a new strategy.
Mhm.
And this strategy is strategic defense. Many experts on the West even say that whole 2024 will be the year of strategic defense for Ukraine.
Mhm. Mhm.
I agree with that. Do you think that this strategy will be more helpful, more effective for Ukraine? Because if, for example, we look now for the battlefield, we see
Mhm.
that Russia is very active along, all front
Mhm.
lines,
Mhm.
and many now speaks about even new dangers for Kharkiv, for example. And in
Mhm.
that case, what do you think? If we, look for action of Russia, do you think that this strategic defense is a good strategy for Ukraine this year?
You might see me smiling right now
Yes, of
because
course. Yeah, I see, of course.
I have I don't know why I'm that way, but as soon as the mass of people, the mass of colleagues is expecting a year of strategic defense, I'm promptly starting to think, oh no, please don't do that. No. Generally, it is so that that Ukrainian armed forces have grown massively over the last 14, 15 months. There are some 25, almost 30 new brigades have been established. And there have been brigades which have been badly damaged, which have suffered heavy losses in earlier battles. And those, I understand the people who are drawing such conclusions, like you have described them, and say, okay, let's bring a little bit routine into all of this. Let's settle down and train the troops, train the officers, train the non-commissioned officers, and spend a year doing nothing, more or less just defending, letting the Russians attack us, and we are going to, because we have enough firepower nowadays, at least in most cases, let them bleed themselves to death. So I understand this approach as well. But generally, I think that making that this obvious to the Russians, again, is a similar mistake like last year. Last year, it was already by April, it was clear how Ukraine is going to attack in southern Zaporozhye. Some were openly talking about directions of attacks and so on. This is the most stupid idea, that there can be at the time of social media. Of course, the Russians are all the time monitoring social media. They know whom are they monitoring and why, because some of sources in the social media are reporting, very reliably. Therefore, when now somebody starts talking about strategic defense for 2024, don't know if this is a good idea discussing this in the public. So I would not recommend doing that for the start, and and the second, you cannot, in the war, no plan is surviving the confrontation with the enemy. So if you say, I'm planning strategic defense for 2024, you don't know what is going to happen. You have to be ready for all eventualities, which means it could be, for example, the Russians attack like they are currently attacking Avdiivka, and then there is an opportunity for a successful counteroffensive. And then the ZSU has to be ready to say, okay, and now we are going to launch a counteroffensive and fall into the weakened Russian positions, or overrun the badly damaged units, and we are going to launch an offensive and drive into the Russian rear in this spot because we have the opportunity. You always have to be ready for such eventualities. So I wouldn't exclude any options. I wouldn't say it is better this way or it is better that way. It is simply so that some units are better prepared, no discussion about this, but then these units should be gradually, one after the other, rotated out of the line to the rear, given refresher training. Actually, this should happen with every single unit, not just those units which are poorer by quality or badly damaged by combat or something else. What ZSU has to stop letting happen is to have, something like 7 or 8, perhaps a dozen of brigades which are fighting all the time. Like 92nd, 93rd mechanized, like 82nd airborne, like 72nd airborne, and so on and so on. These brigades are constantly in battle already since February 22. This is now 2 years. Such units need to get respite, be refilled by fresh troops, retrained, re-equipped, and so on and so on. This is why the logical conclusion is yes, okay, we need time to re-equip and retrain, and therefore strategic defensive in this year. But keep in mind that two strategic defensive, you are giving Russians even more time to do what they want. And as we have seen the last year, the Russians are adapting all the time. And the more time they are given to adapt, the worse for Ukraine and better for Russians. Because they're developing new weapon systems, they are buying new weapons from North Korea, from Iran, from wherever else, and so on and so on. So the problems are going to multiply in this fashion as well. Therefore, I said I wouldn't go as far as to say, oh, Ukraine now has to be quiet this year and run no offensives. Wait and see.
Tom, I remember that last winter Russia launched offensive. Last winter.
Yeah.
And now we see that Russia launched offensive right now as well, this winter too. Do you think that the strategy, reserves, and tactic of this offensive is differ from offensive on last winter? And does it really matter that the difference? What could we say about reserves again, about the weapons which Russia have, about the tactics which Russia use, about strategy? Do you think that something happened with the Russian army?
Well, a lot has happened. It has suffered such losses in the last 2 years that this professional core of the army is next to non-existent. They have even squandered much of their airborne assault troops, VDV in Russian, while stopping the Ukrainian counteroffensive in southern Zaporozhye, which means they do not have the quality anymore. And even if given the time to train their troops and retrain them and so on, the quality is not the same because they do not even have the same amount of top gear, top types of tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, artillery pieces especially. They are worn out and used out. They are currently, the mass of Russian artillery is consisting of 50, 60, 70 years old tubes. So the quality is not there anymore in general. On the other side, they are replacing a lot of their artillery they have lost by UAVs, by drones. Nowadays, you see them, they have improved their Orlan system with these trios of UAVs which are scouting and relaying the information to the base and so on, and collecting electronic intelligence as well, not only video intelligence. And these Orlans, this winter, Orlans are capable of operations in freezing weather. Last winter, they were not. But they were given 1 year, one additional year to improve them, and they have improved them. We are going to see ever more of different versions of UAVs like Shahid coming up, jet-powered Shahid, Shahids which not only have their own warhead inside, but also carry additional ammunition under their wings. So we are going to see new weapons emerging all the time. We are going to see new versions of Lancet drones as well. And they are gradually replacing the artillery, which was obsolete anyway and not precise enough, with mini UAVs. And they are manufacturing these mini UAVs in far bigger numbers than Ukraine could. And I do not see anywhere, whether in Ukraine, this was also another issue. Already, was it March or April, the people in charge of the program Army of Drones were demanding better financing of production and massive increase in production of drones in Ukraine. What happened? This production, or this increase in production came, and they were reassigned to the Ministry of Defense. But it took several months until this has happened. And now Ukraine is all the time lagging in production numbers behind Russia. And this is one of the primary reasons for Ukrainian troops being pushed back north of Avdiivka, because they are hit by so many UAVs that their positions are demolished. The troops are not even killed They're surviving such attacks. But positions are demolished to the degree that they are useless. And the troops have to abandon destroy positions in order to withdraw to intact positions. And then the same situation is repeating again and again. And if you put an inexperienced brigade into such a situation, then you lose an entire sector of the front line, which by measures of this war is a lot. For example, 500 meters. The Russians make an advance and they are on the outskirts of Stepove, just for example. This is one of the things that has happened. So it is fundamental to finally increase the production of UAVs in Ukraine to a level which is matching that of Russia, plus develop and field enough electronic warfare systems to disturb the Russian UAVs, but also to disturb the work of Russian electronic warfare systems. And all of this is coming much too late. It is already the second year of the war, of this all-out invasion, and only now is all of this emerging. While actually such equipment should have started appearing already in autumn 2022, over 1 year ago. It is only now that things are changing. So there are lots of mistakes in terms of strategy and management of the entire war and production facilities and so on, which again are not offering good indicators for the future right now. I hope there's going to be some sort of a reform in Ukraine and in the West as well. I'm always a little bit optimistic, regardless how pessimistic I might appear, and that there is going to be a reorganization in all of this business, in all of this administration. How is the war administered foremost? And there are going to be decisive, somebody's going to bring a few decisive decisions and say, okay, this has to be done this way, this way, this way. We need this and this and this kind of equipment. We are focusing most of our attention on that kind of equipment and on robotics, on UAVs, on electronic warfare. We're changing the nature of the warfare. Perhaps it is so that Ukraine really needs a season of strategic defense for 2024 in order to introduce this fleet-wide, army-wide, if you like. Perhaps in that regard, if this happens, then it's good to say, okay, this year we are not going to launch any kind of offensive. We are just, retraining our troops. We are re-equipping our troops as well with more robots, more UAVs. And then only once we are really ready, we are going to attack again. I hope this is the case. Until then, we are going to see. But Russians are right now, as you have said, they are attacking along the entire front line. They are not advancing a lot. It is really 100 meters one day, 200 meters on another day. Then they are pushed back. Then they send another battalion, lose an entire battalion. But they are all the time buying time. And the Russian strategy in this war is already since late 2022 is actually to wait for US elections in November this year and then hope for Republicans, and especially one of MAGA Republicans, to win the elections and then, say, oh, no, we are not going to support Ukraine anymore. Let's make peace with Putin and grant him, half of Ukraine if necessary, just in order to end the war. This is the strategy, and the West does not think, because it is silly, even if you watch the behavior of specific political parties in the West, whether in the United States, in Germany, France, they have no answer to this strategy. Nobody is even coming to the idea to develop an answer to this strategy, not even an effective strategy to counter Putin-supported political parties in France, in Germany, in Austria, for example, even in the United States. Nothing is happening in this regard. This is something that is making me worries, yes.
Tom, let's speak a little bit about the West and weapons, because I read many articles in different, which was wrote by different analysts from the West, that military industry on the West became more and more, active, and more money now is put into this military industry. Yes. But what do you think? Is it really true that West try to be ready for more Russian aggression? Do you think that West analyze very realistic the situation with Russia? Do you think that Ukraine really could receive more modern weapon, this year or maybe next year. It is very important for us to understand because, if there is another understanding of situation on the West, in that case, Ukraine must understand that we need to do something by ourselves in our country, but it's a little bit complicated because, we have missiles which, just here in Ukraine.
Well, I don't know if it's one of interviews with you or with somebody else last year in spring. I already then said Ukraine will have to take care of itself. As long as you're not standing on your own feet, you're not going to be successful in this war. Which, of course, is not easy because a war of this size and extension costs a lot of money, and Ukraine has no money for this. So perhaps it would be better to say, okay, you know what, West, thank you very much for all the weaponry from 50 years ago. We don't want this anymore. Just send us money, that's it. Just credit us so we can continue fighting. And on the other side, develop cooperation like there were some efforts or at least announcements for projects with joint projects with Poland, with South Korea and so on for development of and production of tanks, of infantry fighting vehicles and so on. The problem is the following. The West has no experience in a war of this kind. The last big war the West has fought was the Second World War. It was, 75, almost 80 years ago. It is not going to change anytime soon. So there is nobody with enough management skill in order to understand the situation. And even if Ukrainians, of course, go to the West and explain to people what is going on in Ukraine and how is this war fought and what amounts of equipment and ammunition supplies are necessary to fight this war, they do not understand this simply. And even if even the Western politicians, they're not politicians, they are administrators. They are appointed to their positions and paid to do their job in order to maintain the status quo, not in order to come to some new ideas, new solutions, to find new solutions, to develop some new strategies, unite the countries, nations, armed forces and say, okay, let's do this now and finish Russians and so on and so on. No, they are there to maintain the status quo. And the status quo was maintained since 1945, which means West is West. If you can do some business in the East, fine. And let's earn money from doing that, even with Putin and similar. Great, fantastic. But otherwise, West is West. And, who cares about the rest? And you can see this even in the Middle East. You can see this in Korea. You can see this in so many other places. The conflicts are frozen. And somebody else is going to take care of that in the future. And the same is actually happening now again. Let's just freeze this conflict in Ukraine. If the Russians really want this eastern part of Ukraine, they should have it. It's not part of our country, so who cares? And fine. And then we are going to leave this for somebody else to clear the mess sometimes in the future. This is automatic reaction. It's an instinctive reaction of Western politicians to what is happening in Ukraine, because Ukraine couldn't win this war in 2 years. Oh gosh, think about that. How terrible is that? That the West has fought 20 years in Afghanistan and 20 years in Iraq and squandered trillions of money. Who cares? It was good business, Nobody cares about this. So there is no analytical thinking in these regards at the top. You certainly have people at lower levels, but they're not influential enough to understand really what is going on and why is it going on, and foremost to have solutions for what is going on. To tell you very clearly, Ukraine needs this, and that, and then it's going to be more successful, more effective on the battlefield. Then it's going to start winning the war. There are such people, lots of them, but they're not influential enough to move the decision makers up there in the White House or in Downing Street number 10 or wherever else. They're not there. They're not in touch with everybody else. Between them, there are 15, 20 levels of secretaries, and assistant secretaries, and who else. And, everybody has fantastic education and super universities and who knows what, and is cashing $500,000 a year, if not more. Everything is perfect, but they know better. And they are experts in administering a status quo, not in developing something new. development of future technologies, of solutions for the future in the West is generally left to the owners to our own oligarchy, to the owners of major corporations. And, well, we are politicians, we are all the time paid to run after them and, please give me more, give me more. That is that. So I'm going to administer in your interest. This is what is happening in the West. And we do not have, when you talk with people from different countries, whether it's Europe or United States, we do not even have the politicians with some kind of visions for the future, solutions, especially solutions, and, really capable of leading. No, we have CEOs, administrators, nothing else. That is the major problem for our situation, because this war would now need somebody like Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his advisors in the Second World War, who would, hit the table if necessary with his fist, or Churchill, and say this war is going to be fought this and that way, and for this and that purpose we need this, and this. So production, financing, blah blah blah, whatever is necessary, let's do it and finish this war. Now, instead, it's fine, the corporation XY is going to earn so and so many billions, but if the war in Ukraine goes for 1 year longer, then it's going to earn even more. So everything is fine in this way, from point of view of our politicians.
Do I understand right that political reason is a reason for not so quick receiving of different types of weapons from West? Do I understand right that it is more political reasons that a number of different types of weapons on the West? Because, for example, if you look for North Korea and Iran, it is very simple to give, for example, for Russia about 1 million of different types of weapons, and everything is fine. But if we look, for example, for European Union countries, which promise us to give some missiles for Ukraine, and nothing happened, or just not million, it is just about 300 of this type of weapons. What's happened? Why it is too small number of weapons on the West? Is it really a question of quantity, or it is a question of policy?
It is foremost a question of policy. I said we have administrators, we have no leaders in the West. We have people who are put in their position, to administer it on behalf of our oligarchy, in interest of our oligarchy, because oligarchy is bribing them to administer, to bring laws which are in favor of this oligarchy. So now imagine you being a politician, for example, in charge in whether in Berlin or London, wherever else you like. So now you are facing a situation which nobody around you, none of your advisors, nobody of the oligarchy who is paying you all the time has experienced. They do not have the ideas, like solutions, what kind of solutions, how can we accelerate our production or whatever else. No, all they want is another re-election. So re-election, the way to re-election is through appearing on TV, on the newspapers and radio and social media and blah, blah, blah. So this is where Zelensky is ideal as a figure to show himself with, Oh, come on, Zelensky, come, let's take a photograph together and everything is fine. This is perfect, this is what the Western politicians like a lot, but it is no solution at all. And now the part of this problem is the following. Their advisors cannot tell our politicians in the West, you need this, this, and this, and this. These are the solutions. This is what you should do. They cannot, because they do not know about this. They would then have to find themselves different advisors. But they are not going to, because their current advisors are not interested in them finding different advisors, of course, because in such case, they wouldn't earn money or they wouldn't have their prestigious positions, but this would be given to somebody else. So while in dictatorships like North Korea or in Iran, the way is much shorter. For example, in North Korea, the guy at the top, he turns around to his generals, what do the Russians need? Either the answer is correct, and the generals are delivering what the Russians need, or the generals are brought in front of some wall, shot, and the next general is coming forward and he has better ideas. We don't have this incentive in the West. We have the systems where everything is talked about and compromises and blah 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 blah, and but nothing happens. While in a dictatorship, this is the advantage of a dictatorship, you have a very short chain of command, which means that the experiences and knowledge are having it easier to reach the upper echelons of governance. In other words, if Putin needs 1 million shells from North Korea, he's going to get them very quickly. But if West has to manufacture 1 million of shells, then the politicians must talk with oligarchy, who is interested in this kind of investment, and what happens if they manufacture too much shells for the next 2 years, and what is then going to happen with the investment in 5 years when there is no war in Ukraine, and who is going to guarantee the oligarchy that they are still going to earn and make profit in 5 and 10 years from this big investment they need now in order to start manufacturing shells. The objectives are entirely different, because the West is not threatened, not directly. And unless there is a direct threat for the West, nobody's going to change the way they are thinking. So we're just living like all the time before the all-out invasion of Ukraine. We're having our parties and buying new cars, everything is fine, everything. We are complaining about high energy prices or inflation. But otherwise, everything is quite the same like 2 or 3 years ago. Who cares? Plenty of people are sad because they have lost their business in Russia. Others are even so far, like Raiffeisen Bank from Austria, to say, well, we have survived the last 2 years, so where is the problem? We can remain in Russia. We can continue business. We are doing good business over there. We are earning billions, so everything is fine. Thank you very much. Why should we withdraw from Russia? There is no incentive. There's no some sort of accumulated effort. Everybody really pulling on one string and in order to defeat Russia and bring this war to an end. That is what we do not have in the West right now.
Tom, what do you think? How Ukraine could be more effective this year if we take into account all political reason, all military reason, all financial reason we speak during this interview? How Ukraine could be effective? What is your recommendation? What do you think? What could be done?
You have this problem. I said Western politicians, they like to take photographs of themselves with Zelensky, and then say, I'm going to give you, how many can we give him? 20? Okay, you're going to get 20 tanks, And 20 tanks is laughable. That is not even a battalion of Ukrainian armed forces or Ukrainian army. So, but, he can say to the microphone, and 15 cameras are taking photographs of him, and 2 TV stations, we are sending 20 tanks to Ukraine. I'll give you another example for this. There was an interview with the Austrian Minister of Defense back in, sometimes in summer, I think, 2022. And she was, so proud of herself. She has organized joint troops of European Union partners who are not members of the NATO. 5,000 troops. A quick reaction force of 5,000 troops. And, she has organized that. And they are ready. They can go defend Austria any time of the day. And I thought to myself, oh gosh, if she would only know that these 5,000 troops, they might be enough, to defend a district of northern Vienna in best case, because this war is entirely different. She cannot understand the situation. And the lady in question is still in charge. She's still a Minister of Defense in Austria. So you have to ask yourself, where are the generals who are advising her? Where are the civilian advisors to her? What are they doing all the time? Why are they paid at all? Why is she still in position? But it's the same, no matter where. Okay, a few governments have changed over the last 2 years, but it's the same way of thinking, same mindset all the time. The people simply do not understand what it means, 5,000 troops. 5,000 troops are enough to defend northern part of Avdiivka sector. But it's just nothing more. So it's laughable to brag about such issues. And when you have such a complex of effects influencing the development, it is very hard to to find solutions, because nobody is coming to the idea to search for actual solutions. And solutions would be such like massive production of UAVs, of drones, of mini UAVs, because they are replacing artillery. No, this is not paying off. This is not interesting. Why is it not interesting? Because, excuse me for expression, every stupid can make these mini UAVs nowadays. And in Ukraine you have how many small enterprises with thousands of people, civilians, without any kind of previous knowledge. And they just get a short course, and then they learn how to make specific parts for mini UAVs, how to assemble them. And you are manufacturing thousands of UAVs in this way. But nobody in the West is coming to the idea to do the same. Why not? Because it's not paying off. It's not profitable enough. It's far more profitable to develop grandiose plans. We are now going to manufacture heavy artillery. The tubes for artillery need something like 1 year of lead time. Heavy industry, then the wheels, and the engines, and everything needs billions. The companies are going to be busy, thousands of workers, and whatever else. 5 political parties. Everybody's going to be happy if you manufacture heavy artillery. This is the way of thinking. There is no way of thinking. We have to manufacture plenty of stuff, and send it to Ukraine yesterday, not only today or tomorrow, but yesterday already. No. This is profit for the next 2 years, the next 4 years. This is securing my re-election. This is a good idea, And so one of the solutions would be to say to the West, okay, what? Thank you very much for the military aid of the last 2 years. That is very kind from you, and it helped us stop the Russian invasion, but it is not enough to win. So how about you just credit us with money, and we take care about weaponry? That would be solution number 1. Why? Because Ukraine knows better.
We could produce or we could buy weapons.
Yes,
yeah? As well.
Because Ukraine knows better than the West what Ukraine needs. The West has no idea what Ukraine needs. I explained the reasons why. The politicians think, 20 tanks, Ukraine is going to be saved, and they are going to drive Russians out all the way to Taganrog and wherever else. So the Ukrainians know better than the West what do they need. And then Ukrainians should say, okay, listen, we have so and so many local manufacturers for mini UAVs. Okay, now let's see if we can get, not only spend this money in Ukraine, but also outside. And get private sectors in neighboring countries or even further away involved. This is where your government is a little bit unflexible. You get the money, and this is our money now. That's it. I understand the reaction. It's a normal reflex. It's this instinctive reflex. We have got the money. We need this money. Ukraine is going to go bankrupt. We cannot go spending money somewhere outside. But you still don't have enough production facilities. And you could make much more UAVs to distributing this production. We have now this Russian missile offensive, and it is striking such local factories of drones, and lots of people get killed. And you have a major security problem with having such small factories in Ukraine, because the civilians are not used to be zip-lip about what is going on, and they are producing UAVs. And if somebody speaks out, I'm manufacturing UAVs at home, he's becoming a legitimate target. Russians are targeting his home with a Kar-22. And boom, the home is blown up. Everybody's complaining about civilians getting killed, but actually Russians have targeted a legitimate target in form of a manufacturing facility for UAVs. So you need such solutions, not just one type of solutions, but combinations of solutions. Okay, this amount of money for production of UAVs, then you need production of electronic warfare equipment. You need production of long-range weaponry, heavy infantry weaponry, which can reach over 2, 3, 4, 5 kilometers, mortars, heavy sniper rifles, anti-material rifles, such production. Because if you check the statistics with your own armed forces, you're going to find out that your snipers are killing more troops than artillery does. Why? They can reach the Russians at the moment. Russians do not expect. They shoot them from 2 kilometers away. Nobody on the other side expects this to happen. And they're doing this cheap. you know, a good sniper rifle costs perhaps something like one artillery shell at most, including the objective and so on, and the full equipment for it, including night vision equipment, perhaps like one artillery shell. Of course, the West is not interested in supplying with such weaponry because this is not profitable enough, with which we are back to heavy weaponry. And then you have also the problem, you know, the West is instantly reacting. And what if Ukraine fails and the Russians get through and so on? I mean, it's absolutely technically impossible. The Russians, even if Ukraine would fold up tomorrow in the morning, the Russians would need 6 months to reach Kiev just by marching, because they're not organized well enough, because their commanders are not good enough for that. So the West actually does not need all the new equipment for itself, but it's still producing equipment for itself instead of sending it to Ukraine. So you have this problem as well. Solution would be to say, okay, then some of facilities have to be inside Ukraine, and we have to manufacture tanks and infantry fighting vehicles for ourselves on our own, created by the West. And if that is not possible, then like there are solutions already in Poland and Slovakia, Czech Republic, perhaps in Romania and Bulgaria as well in regards of ammunition, which means we are investing into production facilities outside of the country. So they are supplying us, and Russians cannot hit them, cannot bomb this factory, and so on and so on. So this kind of solutions is what you need in Ukraine the most. And that is where you can say, okay, in order to get enough of all of this, to manufacture all of this, to increase the production and to build up the stocks, we need a year, you know, and then we are going to spend 2024 without any major counteroffensive, and just restock and retrain our troops and so on.
And one more question, last question, Tom, if it is possible. As I understand, it was very simple logic on the West that war with Ukraine make Russia weaker. And it was it was very simple logic. But now, if we look for the Russia, it seems that it is not very, very good logic, because Russia shows that after the 2 years of the war, Russia, we say about the adaptation, we say about the new types of weapons, and in sometimes this simple logic that Russia will be weaker after the war with Ukraine could be, you know, West could receive another result, that Russia became more strength and be ready to, you know, to go against the NATO, for example, countries. I mean, Baltic countries or something like that. I'm not sure, but sometimes it looks like that.
It is like this. In Russia, there was already a shortage of workforce before the war, and while relations with the West were good already back before 2014. So there was a shortage of workforce, and there were already considerations about importing the workforce from India or from wherever else. Didn't work, to our collective luck, Ukrainian and Western, for primary reasons related to racism and chauvinism in Russia. But anyway, the point is this. Russia is getting weaker on one side, and on the other side, it's given enough time to let's say negate the effects of Western sanctions. Why? Because the West has de facto withdrawn itself from the Middle East, for example, but still thinks that it is in charge of the Middle East. A typical example would be Saudi Arabia or United Arab Emirates, even Qatar. The Western politicians think if they just appear, you know, in Riyadh or in Doha or wherever they are the bosses over there, and everybody's going to listen to them. And they just need, you know, like Jedi Knights in Star Wars movies, you know, just move with their hands and everybody's falling down. This is not the case anymore. People like Mohammed bin Salman and other rulers in the Middle East, you know, they are so powerful and so independent meanwhile, that they do not care about the West. They are doing their own business with China, with Russia, and so on and so on. India, the same. This is the results of Western arrogance for decades and for centuries. The West was explaining, well, we are in charge, we are the bosses, we have everything under control. Well, you don't have this anymore. On the contrary, our economy, big parts of our economy are dependent on Arab investment and on sales into the Arab world, or resales further east from the Arab world, and so on and so on. So the situation is not the same like before. And now we have the situation where our media and our politicians still think that we are in control while we are not, and they are creating the image or impression in the public that we are in control while we are not. And then they expect all the time that nobody's ready not to admit, oh, look, actually, United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, they have more in common with Putin and with Russia than with us. Why? Because they are dictatorships. And there is one guy at the head, and he controls everything, and nobody dares doing anything at all without his permission. So of course, when now somebody goes to Saudi Arabia or to United Arab Emirates and tells them, don't cooperate with Russia, they said, yes, and what else? Because it's boring. You cannot influence them. If necessary, they can crash Google tomorrow in the morning, if they are really beastie, or Volkswagen, and so on. So we do not have them under control anymore. That is one aspect. Then you have countries like India. In India, there is the tradition of rising Russia or Soviet Union into the skies because they saved India in 1971 from U.S. aggression, and correspondingly, India has to help Russia now against Western aggression. And India was 400 years Western colony and so on, and they want their payback. And there were also missed opportunities on the part of the West. Why? For example, India is constantly at odds with China. And because of economic interest in China, nobody in the West cared when China would attack India and try to cross the border and occupy some of Indian territory. So every time there was another clash on the border between India and China, the West would say, "Oh, Indians, be careful! Don't you hurt the Chinese too much, because we have so important economic interests in China, and so on." So of course the Indians say, "Okay, dear West, you can have it now. We are going to make profit." And what do? They're buying gas and oil from Russia and re-exporting it to the West at triple the price, of course. This is why shouldn't they? If the West is so stupid to bring itself in such a position, fine with them. And you have such combinations in very wide parts of the world. And this is what Putin is exploiting for himself. And then it appears as if Russia is not getting weaker, but actually financially and economically it is growing weaker all the time. I mean, it is not like Russia is not going to become some kind of super technological superpower or something of that kind, or like it's going to grow, its economy is going to grow and whatever else. This is all going at the expense of constantly falling gas prices. Russia is meanwhile selling its gas at minimal prices, just to cover our own expenses, and so on and so on. They are actually creating debt. But in a regime like Putin's, this doesn't matter, because he's not responsible to anybody. And it's very easy, because he has no opposition anymore. He has destroyed even all the media that was speaking against him. They're all silenced. Then it's very easy to present himself as highly successful strategist, and everything is going according to the plan, for a 2-week invasion and so on and so on, which is meanwhile 2 years, but who cares? It's very easy to do these kind of things. While I said we have a problem with our own incompetent politicians and corrupt politicians. So especially this mix is ideal for Putin.
Tom, thank you so much to be with us today. Thank you.